The pristine marble floors of Chicago's prestigious Mercy Metropolitan Hospital had witnessed many dramas, but nothing quite like the chaos that erupted at 2:43 a.m. on this fateful Tuesday. The emergency room's automatic doors exploded open with the force of a Hollywood action sequence as a team of paramedics burst through, wheeling in an unconscious figure who would soon turn one doctor's world completely upside down. "Code Blue, we need the best trauma surgeon you've got," shouted the lead paramedic, his voice cutting through the typical late-night hospital hum like a sword through silk. The patient on the gurney was clearly someone of importance. His midnight blue Tom Ford suit, despite being disheveled, probably cost more than most people's annual salary. His thick, obsidian black hair was usually styled to perfection, but now fell carelessly across a face that belonged on magazine covers, not hospital gurneys. This was Sebastian Blackthorne, the 35-year-old tech empire king whose name graced Forbes covers and whose mere presence could make stock markets fluctuate. His company, Blackthorne Dynamics, had revolutionized artificial intelligence, making him one of the youngest billionaires in America. But right now, all that power and wealth meant absolutely nothing. Dr. Valentina Rosewood was elbow-deep in treating a construction worker's broken ribs when the commotion reached her ears. At 29, she possessed the kind of natural beauty that makeup companies spent millions trying to recreate, cascading waves of honey gold hair that caught the fluorescent lights like spun silk, emerald eyes that sparkled with intelligence and compassion, and a smile that could melt the coldest hearts. But beneath that stunning exterior lay a brilliant mind that had graduated top of her class from Harvard Medical School, despite working 3 jobs and living on ramen noodles for 6 years. Her hands, delicate yet steady as a concert pianist's, bore tiny scars from countless hours of volunteer work at free clinics. She wore simple scrubs that couldn't hide her elegant posture, and her only jewelry was a small silver locket, a gift from her late grandmother who had raised her in a cramped Chicago apartment after her parents died in a car accident. "Trauma Bay 2, stat," Valentina commanded, her melodious voice carrying an authority that made seasoned nurses sprint into action. She had no idea that the man being wheeled toward her was worth approximately $12 billion, owned 7 mansions across 3 continents, and had just yesterday fired 3 executives for serving him lukewarm coffee. As the paramedics transferred the unconscious billionaire, Sebastian's steel-blue eyes fluttered open for a brief moment. Through his medicinal haze, he caught a glimpse of the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, a face that seemed to glow, with an inner radiance that had nothing to do with expensive skincare routines or plastic surgery. Her touch was gentle, yet confident, as she checked his pulse, and for a split second, something shifted in his chest that had nothing to do with his current medical emergency. Then darkness claimed him again, but not before his subconscious registered something profound. This woman was different from every gold digger, socialite, and corporate climber who had ever tried to capture his attention. "What's his medical history?" Valentina asked, immediately taking charge as they hooked Sebastian up to monitoring equipment. Her trained eyes quickly assessed his condition: elevated heart rate, irregular breathing, skin pale as winter morning. "That's where we hit a wall, Doc," replied the paramedic, shaking his head in frustration. His security team and assistants just kept repeating Mr. Blackthorne values his privacy like robots. They wouldn't even tell us if he has any allergies. Apparently only his personal physician is authorized to discuss his medical information. Valentina's perfectly arched eyebrows drew together in a frown that somehow made her even more beautiful. "Well, Mr. Blackthorne's privacy preferences won't help him if he goes into cardiac arrest, because we don't know he's allergic to the medication that could save his life. Run a complete blood panel, cardiac enzymes, toxicology screen, and get me a full-body CT scan. And someone call the lab. I want those results in 15 minutes, not 15 hours." As she worked, Sebastian began showing signs of consciousness. His eyelids fluttered like butterfly wings before opening to reveal eyes the color of a stormy Atlantic Ocean. Even in his weakened state, those eyes held an intensity that could make boardrooms fall silent and competitors surrender. That's when Dr. Harrison Pemberton, the hospital's chief administrator and a man who spent more on his weekly manicures than most people earned in a month, came barreling through the doors like a man possessed. His usually pristine silver hair was disheveled, his Hermes tie askew, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the hospital's Arctic air conditioning. "Dr. Rosewood," he gasped, clutching his chest dramatically. "I've just received multiple calls from Blackthorn Dynamics Board of Directors, the mayor's office, and apparently someone from the governor's staff. They're flying in Dr. Edmund Kingsley, you know, the one who charges $50,000 just for a consultation. Perhaps you should step back and—" "Step back?" Valentina's voice dropped to a dangerously quiet tone that made everyone in the room freeze. Her emerald eyes flashed with a fire that could have powered the entire hospital. "Dr. Pemberton, with all due respect, this man's heart is beating irregularly. His blood pressure readings look like lottery numbers, and he's showing signs of severe dehydration that could lead to kidney failure. I don't care if he personally owns the Statue of Liberty. He's my patient, and I took an oath to do no harm, not do no harm unless someone more expensive shows up." At that precise moment, as if the universe had a twisted sense of comedic timing, Sebastian Blackthorn's eyes snapped open with the clarity of a man who had just remembered he owned the world. Despite being flat on his back wearing a hospital gown that probably cost less than his monthly coffee budget, he managed to project an aura of power that made the room's temperature drop several degrees. His gaze immediately locked onto Valentina, with the predatory focus of a shark who had just detected blood in the water. Those storm cloud eyes swept over her appearance with undisguised contempt, taking in her simple scrubs, her practical ponytail, her complete lack of designer accessories that would have marked her as someone worth his time. "You," he said, his voice carrying the kind of aristocratic authority that came from generations of wealth and power, "are definitely not my doctor." Each word was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep. "I specifically requested Dr. Kingsley. He's flown in from Switzerland to treat royalty. Where exactly is he?" Valentina met his imperious gaze without even a flutter of intimidation, her hands continuing their work as she adjusted his IV with the grace of a dancer. "Dr. Kingsley isn't here, Mr. Blackthorn. I am. And right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and a potentially fatal cardiac episode that your money can't negotiate with." Sebastian's perfectly sculpted lips curved into a sneer that had once made a Fortune 500 CEO resign on the spot. "Do you have even the slightest comprehension of who I am? I could purchase this entire hospital with what I spend on lunch. I don't need some bargain basement doctor experimenting on me like I'm her practice dummy." The monitors continued, beeping steadily, but every human in the room seemed to stop breathing. Dr. Pemberton's face went from pink to ash gray in record time. The nurses exchanged looks that clearly said, "The pretty doctor is about to get destroyed and we're about to witness a massacre." But Valentina Rosewood simply smiled, a smile so radiant it could have powered the Chicago skyline, yet somehow terrifying in its complete confidence. "Mr. Blackthorn," she said, her voice carrying the perfect blend of professional courtesy and surgical steel, "your impressive lunch budget might buy you a lot of things. Private jets, politicians, maybe even small countries. But it can't buy you a new heart when yours decides to stop beating, which according to these monitors it's seriously considering doing in the next hour." She paused, letting that sink in while checking his chart with infuriating calm. "Right, now your billions are just numbers on a screen, and this bargain basement doctor is the only person in this room qualified to make sure you live long enough to spend them." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a diamond drop. The silence that followed Valentina's verbal knockout punch stretched for exactly 17 seconds. Sebastian knew because he was staring at the heart monitor, watching, his own pulse spike with what he told himself was indignation. Definitely not admiration for the woman who had just verbally demolished him. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Ever. CEOs trembled in boardrooms when he cleared his throat. Socialites competed for his attention like gladiators in Prada. Even world leaders took his calls within minutes. Yet this goddess in scrubs had just treated him like he was nothing more than another entitled patient having a tantrum. And somehow, impossibly, he found it absolutely infuriating and inexplicably attractive at the same time. "Well," Sebastian said, his voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that had once made a journalist quit their job mid-interview. "I suppose I should be grateful that my bargain basement doctor has such confidence in her limited abilities." He paused, letting his gaze travel from her face to her hands with deliberate slowness. "Tell me, Doctor—" He waited, eyebrow raised in aristocratic expectation. "Rosewood," Valentina replied without missing a beat, completely unfazed by his intimidation tactics. "Dr. Valentina, Rosewood. And you should be grateful, Mr. Blackthorne, because my limited abilities include graduating valedictorian from Harvard Medical School, completing my residency at Johns Hopkins, and saving approximately 2,847 lives in the past 5 years. How many lives has your lunch budget saved lately?" Sebastian's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He wasn't used to people having actual accomplishments to match their attitude. Most people in his circle were riding on trust funds or inherited positions. "Harvard," he said, as if tasting something unpleasant. "How quaint. I suppose they'll accept anyone these days if they have enough student loan debt." What happened next would be talked about in hospital break rooms for months to come. Valentina slowly, deliberately, set down her clipboard. She turned to face Sebastian with the kind of smile that angels probably wore when they were about to cast someone out of paradise. "Mr. Blackthorne," she said, her voice sweeter than honey laced with arsenic. "You're absolutely right. Harvard did accept me despite my shocking lack of a trust fund. They were apparently impressed by my perfect MCAT scores, my undergraduate research on cardiac regeneration, and my volunteer work providing free medical care to people who couldn't afford your lunch budget." She moved closer and Sebastian caught a whiff of her perfume, something light and floral that probably cost less than his tie, but somehow smelled better than anything in his penthouse. "But please don't let my quaint education concern you. I'm sure when your heart stops beating, it won't discriminate based on my socioeconomic background." Dr. Pemberton, who had been watching this exchange like a tennis match played with verbal grenades, finally found his voice. "Perhaps we should all take a step back and—" "Dr. Pemberton," Sebastian interrupted, his eyes never leaving Valentina's face. "I want Dr. Kingsley here within the hour, or I'm transferring to Northwestern Memorial." It was a power play, pure and simple. Sebastian Blackthorne had never met a problem he couldn't solve by throwing money at it or making threats. Valentina laughed, actually laughed, a sound so genuinely amused that it made Sebastian's carefully constructed intimidation crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. "By all means, Mr. Blackthorne, feel free to leave. I'll just need you to sign this AMA form. That's against medical advice for those who didn't attend my quaint medical school. And then you can walk right out those doors." She held up a clipboard with a form already attached. "Of course, I should mention that with your current cardiac instability, you have approximately a 60% chance of making it to the parking garage before collapsing. But hey, at least you'll collapse with your dignity intact, right?" The two nurses in the room exchanged glances that clearly said, "This woman just told Sebastian Blackthorne he might die in a parking garage, and somehow she's winning this argument." Sebastian felt something he hadn't experienced in over a decade: uncertainty. He was used to people being either terrified of him or desperately trying to please him. Valentina Rosewood seemed to be doing neither. She was treating him like he was just another person. It was infuriating. It was confusing. It was— "You're bluffing," he said, but there was less conviction in his voice than usual. Valentina pulled up his chart on the tablet, turning the screen so he could see the numbers and graphs that looked like abstract art to him, but apparently told her everything she needed to know. "Mr. Blackthorne, I don't bluff with people's lives. Your troponin levels are elevated, indicating possible heart muscle damage. Your electrolytes are more unbalanced than a reality TV show, and your stress hormones are through the roof. You're not just sick, you're potentially dying. And unlike stock prices or corporate acquisitions, death doesn't negotiate." For the first time in his adult life, Sebastian Blackthorne felt genuinely afraid. Not the calculated fear of losing money or market position, but the primal, human fear of mortality. And the woman delivering this news was doing so with a combination of professional competence and personal warmth that he'd never encountered in his sterile world of corporate medicine and concierge healthcare. What? He swallowed hard, his voice losing some of its imperious edge. What do you think is wrong with me? Valentina's expression softened almost imperceptibly. It was the first crack in his armor, and she recognized it for what it was. Genuine vulnerability from a man who probably hadn't shown weakness since he was in diapers. I won't know for certain until we get your test results back, but based on your symptoms and presentation, I suspect severe exhaustion, dehydration, and possible stress-induced cardiac issues. When was the last time you ate a real meal? Slept more than 4 hours consecutively? Took a vacation that didn't involve checking emails every 5 minutes? Sebastian opened his mouth to deliver a scathing response about how successful people didn't have time for such luxuries, then realized he couldn't actually remember the answers to any of her questions. When had he last eaten something that wasn't consumed during a meeting? When had he last slept without his phone on the nightstand? When had he last taken a breath without calculating its opportunity cost? He started, then stopped, looking genuinely confused. I have responsibilities. Shareholders, employees, market fluctuations don't sleep, Dr. Rosewood. Neither do heart attacks, Mr. Blackthorne, she replied gently, and for the first time since he'd opened his eyes, her voice held genuine compassion, instead of professional detachment or barely concealed irritation. Your body is trying to tell you something. The question is, are you going to listen to it, or are you going to argue with it until it stops working altogether? At that moment, Sebastian's phone, which had somehow survived his collapse and subsequent ambulance ride, began buzzing with the urgency of a fire alarm. The screen showed 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and 29 emails, all marked urgent. Valentina glanced at the phone, then back at Sebastian with a look that was part pity, part understanding, and part something else he couldn't quite identify. When was the last time that phone stopped buzzing for more than an hour? Sebastian stared at the device like it was a poisonous snake. He couldn't remember. He literally could not remember a time when his phone wasn't demanding his immediate attention. The business world never stops, Dr. Rosewood. If I'm not available, the business world will survive one night without you, Mr. Blackthorne. The question is, will you survive another night like this? She reached over, and with movements so quick he didn't have time to protest, turned his phone completely off. There. The world didn't end. Amazing. The sudden silence from his phone was deafening. Sebastian felt a panic rising in his chest that had nothing to do with his medical condition. That phone was his lifeline, his connection to his empire, his... Breathe, Valentina said softly, and he realized he had indeed stopped breathing. The world spun for billions of years before smartphones existed. It can handle a few hours without your immediate input. And then she did something that no one had done to Sebastian Blackthorne since he was 5 years old. She placed her hand over his and squeezed gently, a gesture of comfort and reassurance that somehow felt more valuable than all his billions combined. At 4:17 a.m., Sebastian Blackthorne experienced something he hadn't felt since childhood: complete and utter boredom. Without his phone buzzing every 30 seconds, without emails demanding immediate responses, without the constant digital noise that had become the soundtrack of his existence, he was left alone with something he'd been avoiding for years: his own thoughts. The private room Dr. Pemberton had hastily arranged was luxurious by hospital standards, but to someone who owned penthouses in 3 time zones, it felt like a prison cell. The walls were beige. Who chose beige for anything? And the only entertainment was a television that apparently only received channels from 1995. More disturbing than the decor, however, was the fact that Dr. Valentina Rosewood had not returned to check on him in over 2 hours. Sebastian told himself he was simply concerned about his medical care. It had absolutely nothing to do with the way her emerald eyes had softened when she'd touched his hand, or how her laugh had sounded like music he'd forgotten existed. He was Sebastian Blackthorne, for crying out loud. He didn't sit around pining for anyone. especially not a doctor who probably drove a car older than his youngest intern. The door opened with a soft whoosh, and Sebastian's heart rate, which the monitor helpfully announced to the entire room, spiked dramatically. But instead of Valentina's graceful silhouette, a short, round nurse with graying hair and kind eyes entered, pushing a cart that smelled suspiciously like actual food. "Good morning, Mr. Blackthorne," she said cheerfully, apparently immune to his intimidating glare. "I'm Nurse Patricia, but everyone calls me Pat. Dr. Rosewood ordered you a proper meal since you haven't had solid food and..." She consulted her chart. "Goodness, when did you last eat something that wasn't liquid or caffeinated?" Sebastian tried to remember. There had been that power lunch with the Japanese investors, but he'd been too busy negotiating to actually eat. Before that, maybe the charity gala, but he'd only attended for networking purposes. "I don't typically have time for elaborate meals," he said stiffly. Pat laughed, a warm, maternal sound that reminded him uncomfortably of his nanny from childhood, before his parents had decided he was old enough to build character without such luxuries. "Honey, this isn't elaborate. It's scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice, basic human fuel." She set the tray down and began uncovering dishes that looked like they belonged in a different universe from his usual caviar and champagne lifestyle. The eggs were fluffy and golden, the toast was perfectly browned, and the orange juice was clearly fresh squeezed. It looked normal, comforting, alien. Dr. Rosewood specifically requested the orange juice, Pat continued, adjusting his pillows, with the efficiency of someone who had been mothering patients for decades. "Said something about your vitamin C levels being lower than a college student's bank account." Despite himself, Sebastian almost smiled at that. Almost. "Where is Dr. Rosewood? Shouldn't she be monitoring my condition personally?" Pat gave him a look that suggested she had raised at least 3 teenagers and could spot a crush from orbit. "Oh, she's been monitoring you, all right. Been checking your charts every 20 minutes all night. But she's also been dealing with a multi-car accident, 2 heart attacks, and a food poisoning epidemic from that new sushi place downtown. Emergency medicine doesn't stop just because one patient needs extra attention." The implication hit Sebastian like a slap. He had naturally assumed that his condition and his wealth would make him the hospital's top priority. The idea that Valentina was treating other patients, saving other lives while he sat here feeling sorry for himself was both humbling and oddly attractive. "She must be exhausted," he found himself saying, then immediately wondered where that thought had come from. "Honey, that girl's been on her feet for 14 hours straight," Pat said, bustling around the room with practiced efficiency. "Started her shift yesterday afternoon, worked through the night, and she's got another 6 hours to go. But you know what? She loves it. Never seen a doctor who cares more about her patients." Sebastian took a bite of the scrambled eggs and was shocked to discover they were delicious. When had he stopped noticing the taste of food? "She seems very dedicated," he said carefully. Pat paused in her tidying and fixed him with a stare that seemed to see straight through his carefully constructed facade. "Mr. Blackthorne, can I tell you something?" He nodded, partly because he was curious and partly because Pat seemed like the kind of woman who would tell him anyway. "I've been working in this hospital for 32 years. I've seen doctors who are brilliant but cold, doctors who are caring but incompetent, and doctors who are just punching a clock until retirement. Dr. Rosewood is something special. She's got the brain of a genius and the heart of a saint, and she treats every patient, from homeless folks to politicians, like they're the most important person in the world." Sebastian felt something twist in his chest that had nothing to do with his cardiac issues. "She certainly has strong opinions about everything." "Oh, honey," Pat laughed. "You haven't seen anything yet. Last month she got into an argument with a pharmaceutical executive who was trying to pressure the hospital into using his company's overpriced medication instead of a cheaper alternative that worked just as well. She cited 17 peer-reviewed studies from memory and made him leave with his tail between his legs. The man probably makes more in a day than she makes in a year, but she didn't back down 1 inch. The door opened again, and this time Sebastian's heart rate spiked for all the right reasons. Valentina entered, looking slightly rumpled but still radiant. carrying a tablet and wearing an expression of professional concern that didn't quite hide the exhaustion in her eyes. She had changed her scrubs at some point during the night. These were soft blue instead of green, and her honey gold hair was now pulled back in a messy bun held together with what appeared to be a pen. She looked beautiful and tired, and completely unaware of her effect on his supposedly sophisticated sensibilities. "Good morning, Mr. Blackthorne," she said, her voice carrying the slight hoarseness that came from a long night of giving orders and saving lives. "I see Pat brought you some real food. How are you feeling?" "Better," Sebastian replied, and was surprised to realize it was true. The crushing weight in his chest had lifted somewhat, and the constant anxiety that had become his normal state seemed to have receded. "The food is surprisingly good." Valentina smiled, a real smile this time, not the professional courtesy version, and Sebastian felt his heart do something that definitely registered on the monitor. "Hospital food gets a bad reputation, but our kitchen staff actually cares about nutrition and taste. Novel concept, I know." She moved to check his IV, and Sebastian caught that light floral scent again. Up close, he could see the tiny freckles scattered across her nose, could notice the way her lashes cast shadows on her cheeks when she looked down at his chart. She was even more beautiful than he'd realized, but it was a natural, unadorned beauty that came from within rather than from expensive treatments and personal trainers. "Your numbers are looking much better," she said, scrolling through data on her tablet. "Blood pressure is stabilizing, heart rhythm is more regular, and your hydration levels are improving. Whatever you were doing to yourself before last night, your body is grateful for the break." "Dr. Rosewood?" Sebastian said, then paused. He had been about to ask about his discharge time, about when he could return to his office, about the 17 meetings he was missing. Instead, he heard himself ask, "When do you sleep?" She looked up, surprised by the question. "Sleep is overrated," she said lightly, but he could see the exhaustion she was trying to hide. "That's not an answer." For a moment, their eyes met and held. Sebastian saw something flicker in those emerald depths. Surprise, maybe, that he was asking personal questions, that he seemed to care about her well-being instead of just his own. "I grab a few hours when I can," she admitted. "Between shifts, sometimes in the on-call room if it's been a quiet night, which, as you can probably guess, doesn't happen very often." "That's not sustainable," Sebastian found himself saying, and meant it. "You're going to burn out." Valentina's smile was soft and slightly sad. "Mr. Blackthorne, with respect, you're lecturing me about burnout while lying in a hospital bed because your lifestyle literally put you here. When was the last time you slept 8 consecutive hours?" She had him there. Sebastian tried to remember, and came up empty. "Point taken," he said quietly. "Your test results should be back within the hour," Valentina continued, checking his monitors one final time. "If everything looks good, we can probably discuss discharge later this afternoon. I'm sure you're eager to get back to your empire building." But as she turned to leave, Sebastian realized with startling clarity that he wasn't eager to get back to anything. For the first time in years, he was exactly where he wanted to be. "Dr. Rosewood?" She paused at the door, looking back over her shoulder. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Her smile could have powered the entire city of Chicago. At precisely 2:47 p.m., Sebastian's carefully constructed bubble of hospital serenity was obliterated by the arrival of his personal assistant, Marcus Wellington III, a man so uptight he made British royalty look relaxed. Marcus burst through the door like a tornado in an Armani suit, clutching 3 phones, 2 tablets, and what appeared to be a portable printer, because apparently the fate of Western civilization depended on Sebastian's immediate access to hard copies. "Mr. Blackthorne," Marcus gasped, looking like he'd run a marathon in designer shoes. "Thank goodness you're alive. The board is in complete chaos. The Tokyo merger is hanging by a thread, and someone started a rumor that you'd been kidnapped by corporate rivals. I've been fielding calls from everyone. The SEC, your mother, that reporter from Forbes who keeps asking about your mysterious collapse." "Sebastian," who had been enjoying a surprisingly pleasant conversation with Pat about her grandson's little league career, felt the familiar weight of his responsibilities crashing back down on him like an avalanche of expensive suits and unrealistic expectations. "Marcus, breathe," Sebastian said, though he could feel his own breathing becoming shallow as his assistant began spreading documents across every available surface. "What's the damage assessment?" "Stock price dropped 12% in after hours. Trading. The Yamamoto deal is threatening to walk, and apparently your absence from the Climate Summit dinner last night was interpreted as a deliberate snub by 3 different environmental groups," Marcus rattled off, his voice rising in pitch with each crisis. "Oh, and your stepmother called 17 times asking if she needs to start planning a funeral or a comeback tour." Despite everything, Sebastian almost smiled at that. Eleanor Blackthorne had always been refreshingly direct about her priorities. "And," Marcus continued, pulling out his phone like it was a weapon of mass destruction, "Dr. Edmund Kingsley is in the building. He flew in from Switzerland on your private jet, and he is displeased about being kept waiting." At that moment, the door opened again and Sebastian felt his blood pressure spike in ways that definitely violated hospital regulations. Dr. Edmund Kingsley swept into the room like a medical emperor reviewing his conquered territories. Tall, distinguished, and wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, he carried himself with the arrogance of someone who had never been told no in his entire privileged existence. "Sebastian," Dr. Kingsley boomed, his accent a perfect blend of Swiss precision and British condescension. "My dear boy, what on earth are you doing in the Bitburn establishment?" He glanced around the room like he was surveying a crime scene. "When," Marcus called, "I naturally assumed you'd been taken to Northwestern Memorial or at least somewhere with proper facilities for someone of your standing." Sebastian felt something uncomfortable twist in his stomach, a feeling he was beginning to recognize as shame. 6 hours ago, he would have agreed completely with Kingsley's assessment. Now, having spent the night being cared for by people who actually seemed to give a damn about his well-being rather than his bank account, the criticism felt like an insult to something precious. "Dr. Kingsley," Sebastian said carefully, "the medical care here has been adequate." "Adequate?" Kingsley laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "My dear Sebastian, adequate is for the masses. You require excellence, precision, the kind of personalized care that only comes with proper breeding and education." He pulled out his own tablet, considerably more expensive looking than anything the hospital staff carried. "I've reviewed your preliminary charts, downloaded through some back channels naturally, and I must say the treatment protocol is embarrassingly basic. Amateur hour, really." That uncomfortable feeling in Sebastian's stomach was rapidly becoming something much stronger. "The doctors here seem quite competent." "Competent," Kingsley sniffed, "is a charitable description for public hospital physicians. They mean well, I'm sure, but they lack the sophistication necessary for someone of your caliber. Now, I've already arranged for your transfer to my private clinic. We'll have you properly situated within the hour." The door opened one more time and Sebastian's heart did something that definitely showed up on the monitors. Valentina entered, but she wasn't the tired, gentle doctor from this morning. This was Dr. Valentina Rosewood in full battle mode. Her spine straight, her eyes blazing with professional fury, and her entire demeanor radiating the kind of controlled anger that could level cities. She had clearly overheard at least part of Kingsley's speech, and if looks could kill, the distinguished Swiss doctor would have been vaporized on the spot. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the deadly calm of a hurricane's eye, "I couldn't help but overhear your discussion about Mr. Blackthorne's transfer." She stepped into the room with the predatory grace of a lioness protecting her territory. "I'm Dr. Rosewood, and I've been overseeing his care." Kingsley barely glanced at her, the kind of dismissive look that had probably made medical students weep. "Ah yes, the attending physician. Tell me, where did you complete your residency?" "Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic." "Please don't tell me it was somewhere pedestrian." Valentina's smile was so sweet it could have given entire populations diabetes. "Johns Hopkins, actually. Finished top of my program. But I'm sure your credentials are equally impressive, Dr. Kingsley." Harvard Medical, Stanford, University of Geneva, followed by advanced studies at Oxford, Kingsley replied smugly. Quite a different caliber of education, I'm afraid. Oh, absolutely, Valentina agreed, her tone remaining devastatingly pleasant. European medical schools are known for their traditional approaches. I'm sure you learned some fascinating historical techniques. Tell me, do you still practice bloodletting? Or have you moved on to more modern treatments like, say, actually listening to your patients? Sebastian watched this exchange with the fascination of someone witnessing a verbal gladiator match. Marcus had gone completely silent, his phones forgotten. Even the heart monitor seemed to be holding its breath. Kingsley's face flushed slightly. I hardly think someone from a public hospital is qualified to question my methods. I treat royalty, heads of state, individuals who require the utmost discretion and expertise. How wonderful for you, Valentina replied. I treat human beings. Apparently we have different specialties. She turned to Sebastian, and her expression softened just enough to show genuine concern. Mr. Blackthorne, Dr. Kingsley is absolutely correct that you have the right to transfer your care to any physician you choose. However, I should mention that moving you right now, before we've completed your cardiac monitoring protocol, would be medically inadvisable. Your condition has stabilized, but it's not yet resolved. Medically inadvisable? Kingsley scoffed. My dear girl, I've been treating cardiac conditions since before you were born. Mr. Blackthorne will receive far superior care at my facility. Valentina's eyes flashed dangerously. Your facility that's an hour away through Chicago traffic? Where you'll need to restart all his tests because you don't trust our amateur diagnostics? That superior care? Our equipment is state-of-the-art. Our equipment, Valentina interrupted smoothly, diagnosed his condition correctly and began treatment immediately. Your equipment might be shiny and expensive, but it can't travel back in time to undo the cardiac stress that moving him prematurely might cause. Sebastian felt like he was watching a tennis match played with scalpels instead of rackets. Both doctors were clearly brilliant, but there was something fundamentally different about their approaches. Kingsley spoke about him like he was a valuable object to be maintained. Valentina spoke about him like he was a human being whose life actually mattered. The decision, Kingsley said with supreme confidence, is ultimately Mr. Blackthorne's, and I'm quite certain that someone of his intelligence and social standing will make the obvious choice. The room fell silent. Marcus clutched his phones, like lifelines. Kingsley stood with the smug assurance of someone who had never been denied anything he wanted. And Valentina looked at Sebastian with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not pleading, not demanding, just waiting, trusting him to make his own decision, regardless of the consequences. For the first time in his life, Sebastian Blackthorne realized that the most important decision he'd ever make had nothing to do with money, power, or social status. It had everything to do with the kind of man he wanted to be. Dr. Kingsley, Sebastian said slowly, his voice carrying a new kind of authority. Not the kind that came from wealth, but the kind that came from finally knowing what mattered. I appreciate you flying all this way. Marcus will arrange for your compensation and travel expenses. Kingsley smiled triumphantly. Excellent. I'll have the transfer paperwork prepared immediately. However, Sebastian continued, and his voice cut through Kingsley's celebration like a blade through silk. I'll be staying here, under Dr. Rosewood's care. The silence that followed was so complete that the hospital's ventilation system sounded like a freight train. Kingsley's face went through several interesting color changes. I beg your pardon? Dr. Rosewood is right, Sebastian said, surprised by how good it felt to say those words. Moving me now would be medically inadvisable, and frankly, I trust her judgment more than I trust tradition. Valentina's smile could have powered the entire Midwest. The aftermath of Dr. Kingsley's dramatic exit, which involved 3 different insults about American medical standards, 2 threats to never return to this provincial establishment, and 1 magnificently petulant door slam, left Sebastian's hospital room in a silence so profound that even the heart monitor seemed afraid to beep. Marcus stood frozen like a deer in headlights, still clutching his phones but looking like he'd forgotten what they were for. Valentina remained by the door, her professional mask firmly in place, but Sebastian could see something vulnerable flickering behind her emerald eyes. And Sebastian himself felt like he'd just jumped off a cliff without checking if there was water below. "Well," Valentina said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "That was dramatic." "Dr. Kingsley has always had a flair for theatrics," Sebastian replied, then realized how that sounded. Not that his theatrical exit was unwarranted. His behavior was completely inappropriate, and I should have stopped him sooner. Valentina looked surprised. "You don't need to apologize for him, Mr. Blackthorne. We deal with difficult personalities in medicine all the time. Though I admit, most of them are patients, not visiting physicians." Marcus cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, I should mention that Dr. Kingsley was quite vocal about his displeasure on his way out. Something about filing complaints with the medical board and the hospital administration. And possibly writing a scathing review in some international medical journal." "Let him," Sebastian said, and the firmness in his own voice surprised him. "Dr. Rosewood's medical care has been exemplary. If Dr. Kingsley wants to throw a tantrum because his patient chose competence over connections, that says more about him than it does about this hospital." The way Valentina's face lit up at those words made Sebastian's chest tighten in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with his cardiac condition. "Mr. Blackthorne," she said softly, "I want you to know that your decision to stay wasn't just about medical care, was it?" The question hung in the air between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Sebastian found himself staring into those incredible eyes and realizing that for the first time in his adult life, he wanted to tell someone the complete truth about what he was feeling. "No," he admitted quietly. "It wasn't just about medical care." Before either of them could explore that admission further, Marcus's phone erupted into a cacophony of ringtones, text alerts, and what sounded like a small nuclear explosion. All 3 phones were going off simultaneously, creating a symphony of digital chaos that would have given Beethoven a migraine. "Oh no," Marcus moaned, looking at the screens with the expression of someone witnessing the apocalypse. "Sir, the news about Dr. Kingsley's visit has leaked. Social media is exploding. Blackthorne Hospital Gate is trending worldwide. The stock price just dropped another 8%, and apparently someone got video of Dr. Kingsley's exit rant and posted it on TikTok." "TikTok?" Sebastian asked weakly. 17 million views and counting," Marcus reported, his voice climbing toward hysteria. "The comments are, well, let's just say Dr. Kingsley is not winning the court of public opinion. Most people seem to think he's an arrogant dinosaur who got schooled by a brilliant American doctor." Despite the chaos, Valentina couldn't suppress a small smile. At least they got the brilliant American doctor part right. Sebastian found himself laughing, actually laughing, at the absurdity of it all. "Marcus, turn off the phones." "Sir?" "All of them. Turn them off. Right now." Marcus looked like Sebastian had just asked him to set himself on fire. "But sir, the board is demanding an immediate response to the media situation. Your mother called 6 times in the last 10 minutes, and the mayor's office wants to schedule a damage control meeting." "Marcus," Sebastian said, his voice gentle but firm, "the world managed to function for thousands of years without instant communication. It can survive a few more hours while I finish my medical treatment. Turn off the phones, go home, get some sleep, and we'll deal with the circus tomorrow." "But that's an order, Marcus. And tell the board that if they can't handle one day without my micromanagement, maybe it's time to reevaluate their competence levels." Marcus looked like he might faint, but he obediently powered down the devices. "Yes, sir. Should I tell them anything specific about your condition?" Sebastian glanced at Valentina, who was watching this exchange with fascination. "Tell them I'm receiving excellent care from the finest medical team in Chicago, and that I'll return to work when my doctor clears me for duty." After Marcus left, still looking shell-shocked but slightly relieved, Sebastian and Valentina found themselves alone for the first time since their initial confrontation. The silence was different now, charged with possibilities and unspoken questions. "That was quite a power move," Valentina said, settling into the chair beside his bed. "Turning off all communication with your empire to focus on recovery. Very un-billionaire-like." "Maybe I'm tired of being a billionaire," Sebastian said, then immediately wondered where that thought had come from. Valentina studied his face, with the same intensity she probably reserved for complex medical diagnoses. "What would you be instead?" It was such a simple question, but Sebastian realized he had no idea how to answer it. He'd been Sebastian Blackthorne, tech mogul, for so long that he'd forgotten there might be other possibilities. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been so focused on building an empire that I never stopped to ask what I actually wanted from life." "Well," Valentina said, her voice taking on a teasing tone that made his heart skip in delightful ways, "you've got some time to figure it out. Doctor's orders." "Dr. Rosewood," Sebastian said, suddenly serious, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you become a doctor? And don't give me the standard answer about wanting to help people. I mean, what really drove you to choose this life?" Valentina was quiet for a long moment, and Sebastian could see her debating how much truth to share. Finally, she spoke. "When I was 12, my grandmother had a heart attack. We couldn't afford the best medical care, so she ended up in a public hospital emergency room. The doctor who treated her was overworked, understaffed, and dealing with 10 other critical patients. But he took the time to explain everything to me, to treat my grandmother with dignity and respect, and to make sure she got the care she needed regardless of our ability to pay." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. "He saved her life, but more than that, he showed me that medicine at its best isn't about money or status. It's about seeing the humanity in every person who walks through those doors." "Your grandmother," Sebastian said softly. "Is she?" "She lived another 8 years," Valentina smiled. "Long enough to see me graduate from medical school. She always said that doctor gave her the greatest gift imaginable, time with her granddaughter." Sebastian felt something shift inside his chest, something that had nothing to do with his medical condition and everything to do with the remarkable woman sitting beside him. "That doctor must be very proud of what you became." "He retired last year," Valentina said, "but he still sends me a card every Christmas with the same message: keep fighting the good fight." "Is that what you're doing? Fighting the good fight?" Valentina met his eyes, and Sebastian saw something there that took his breath away. A combination of strength, vulnerability, and hope that he'd never encountered in his world of corporate warriors and social climbers. "Every day," she said, simply, "even when the patients are difficult billionaires who think they can buy their way out of heart problems." "Especially then?" Sebastian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Especially then," she confirmed, and when she smiled, Sebastian knew with absolute certainty that his life had just changed forever. At that moment, Pat bustled in carrying another tray, took one look at the two of them staring at each other like they'd just discovered fire, and grinned like a woman who had successfully orchestrated 17 marriages in her nursing career. "Well now," she said cheerfully, setting down what appeared to be homemade chocolate chip cookies, "looks like someone's finally getting the kind of medicine that actually works." Sebastian and Valentina both turned red simultaneously, but neither of them looked away. "Pat," Valentina protested weakly, "that's completely unprofessional." "Honey," Pat interrupted, "I've been watching people fall in love in this hospital for 3 decades. I know what it looks like, and it looks exactly like this." Sebastian realized that for the first time in his life, he didn't want to argue with someone's assessment of his personal situation, because Pat was absolutely right. He was falling in love, and surprisingly, it felt like the smartest business decision he'd ever made. 3 days later, Sebastian Blackthorne stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, looking down at the city of Chicago sprawling beneath him like a circuit board of lights and dreams. His reflection stared back at him. Same expensive suit, same perfectly styled hair, same face that had graced countless magazine covers. But the man behind those steel blue eyes was fundamentally different from the one who had collapsed in a boardroom 72 hours ago. His phone finally turned back on, buzzed incessantly with messages, but for the first time in his adult life, Sebastian ignored them. He was thinking about emerald eyes and the sound of genuine laughter. He was thinking about a woman who had saved his life in more ways than medical science could measure. "Sir?" Marcus appeared in the doorway, looking significantly less frazzled than he had at the hospital, but still maintaining his trademark nervous energy. "The board is assembled for the emergency meeting. They're concerned about the media coverage and want to discuss damage control strategies." Sebastian turned from the window, his decision crystallizing like ice forming on a winter morning. "Marcus, cancel the meeting." "Sir, cancel the meeting and clear my schedule for the rest of the week." Marcus's face went through several interesting contortions. "Sir, with respect, the Tokyo merger." "We'll wait," Sebastian said firmly. "Or it won't. Either way, the world won't end. But the stock price is just a number on a screen, Marcus. Cancel everything." 20 minutes later, Sebastian was walking through the halls of Mercy Metropolitan Hospital with a determination that had once conquered corporate boardrooms, but was now focused on something infinitely more important. He carried a bouquet of flowers, not the elaborate, expensive arrangements he usually sent to business associates, but simple sunflowers that reminded him of Valentina's smile. He found her in the pediatric ward, reading to a group of children whose parents couldn't afford private health care, but who were receiving the same loving care that she'd given him. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor in fresh scrubs, her honey gold hair falling in waves around her shoulders, as she animated the story with voices and gestures that had the kids giggling with delight. Sebastian stood in the doorway, watching this scene of pure, unfiltered kindness, and felt his heart do something that definitely wouldn't register on any medical equipment. This was what love looked like when it wasn't complicated by money or social status or corporate maneuvering. This was what he'd been missing his entire life. And then the dragon realized Valentina was saying in a dramatically deep voice that he didn't need to be scary to be important. He just needed to be himself. One little girl with pigtails and a cast on her arm raised her hand. "Dr. Rosewood, do you think mean people can learn to be nice?" Valentina's eyes met Sebastian's across the room, and her smile could have powered the entire hospital. "I think everyone can learn to be better than they were yesterday, sweetheart. Sometimes it just takes the right teacher." After the children were collected by nurses for various treatments and naps, Valentina walked over to where Sebastian stood, still holding his sunflowers like a shield against vulnerability. "Those are beautiful," she said, accepting the flowers with a grace that made his chest tighten. "Sunflowers are my favorite. How did you know?" "Lucky guess," Sebastian replied. Though the truth was he'd spent an hour at the flower shop asking the elderly proprietor what kind of flowers someone like Valentina would appreciate. The woman had taken one look at his expensive suit and designer watch, then suggested something real and unpretentious, like the lady you're trying to impress must be. "What brings you back to our humble establishment?" Valentina asked, her tone teasing but with an undercurrent of something more serious. "I hope you're not experiencing any symptoms." "No symptoms," Sebastian said quickly. "Well, actually, that's not entirely true. I've been experiencing some unusual side effects since my discharge." Valentina's professional instincts kicked in immediately. "What kind of side effects? Chest pain, shortness of breath, dizziness?" "Nothing like that," Sebastian said, stepping closer. "It's more like chronic distraction, inability to focus on anything except green eyes and the sound of laughter, complete loss of interest in corporate profits and stock prices, and a persistent, overwhelming desire to spend time with a certain brilliant doctor who probably thinks I'm an arrogant billionaire with more money than sense." Valentina's cheeks flushed pink, but she maintained her composure. "Those are interesting symptoms, Mr. Blackthorne. What do you think might be causing them?" "I have a theory," Sebastian said, his voice dropping to something softer and more vulnerable than she'd ever heard from him. But I'd need a second opinion from a medical professional. Well, Valentina said, her own voice becoming breathier. As your doctor, I suppose I should evaluate your condition thoroughly. They were standing close enough now that Sebastian could see the tiny flecks of gold in her emerald eyes, could catch that light floral scent that had haunted his dreams. Dr. Rosewood, he said seriously, I need to tell you something. What's that? You were right about everything. My lifestyle was killing me. Not just physically, but spiritually. I'd built an empire, but lost myself in the process. These past few days, thinking about what you said, remembering how it felt to have someone actually care about my well-being instead of my net worth. He paused, gathering courage for the most important words he'd ever spoken. You didn't just save my life, Valentina. You gave me a reason to want to live it differently. Valentina's eyes filled with tears that she tried to blink away. Sebastian, I love you, he said simply, the words falling between them like a bridge across an impossible divide. I know it's crazy. I know we're from completely different worlds. I know you probably think I'm just another rich guy having a midlife crisis. But I love you, and I want to spend whatever time you'll give me proving that I can be the kind of man who deserves someone like you. For a moment that lasted forever, Valentina just stared at him. Then slowly, a smile spread across her face. Not the professional courtesy smile or the teasing grin, but something radiant and real and completely unguarded. You know, she said softly, for someone who claims to be having a midlife crisis, you're showing remarkably good judgment. Is that your medical opinion, Dr. Rosewood? That's my personal opinion, Sebastian. And personally, she stepped closer, close enough that he could see his own reflection in her eyes. I think I might be falling in love with you too. The kiss that followed was nothing like the calculated romantic gestures Sebastian had performed with socialites and business associates. It was tender and passionate and real, the kind of kiss that rewrote the fundamental rules of a person's universe. When they finally broke apart, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing like they'd just run a marathon. So, he said, his voice rough with emotion, what's the treatment plan for my condition, doctor? Valentina laughed, the sound Sebastian had been craving like an addict craves their next fix. Well, I'd recommend regular doses of genuine human connection, a significant reduction in corporate stress, and frequent consultations with your primary care physician. How frequent? Sebastian asked, his arms tightening around her waist. Daily, Valentina said solemnly. Maybe twice daily, depending on the severity of symptoms. I think I can manage that treatment schedule, Sebastian murmured against her lips. As they kissed again, neither of them noticed Pat watching from the nurse's station, grinning like a woman who had just won the lottery. Another successful treatment, she murmured to herself, making a note in an imaginary chart. Patient's prognosis. Excellent chance of a full recovery and a lifetime of happiness. Epilogue. 1 year later, Dr. Valentina Blackthorne, she'd kept both names, professional and personal, stood in the gleaming lobby of the new Rosewood Blackthorne Free Clinic, watching her husband cut the ribbon with the same intensity he'd once reserved for hostile corporate takeovers. The clinic, funded entirely by Sebastian's personal fortune, would provide free medical care to anyone who needed it, regardless of their ability to pay. Ladies and gentlemen, Sebastian said, his voice carrying easily across the crowd of reporters, city officials and community members, it's my honor to announce that the Rosewood Blackthorne Free Clinic is officially open. Our mission is simple, to ensure that quality health care is a right, not a privilege, and that no one in Chicago will ever have to choose between medical care and financial survival. The crowd erupted in applause, but Sebastian's eyes found Valentina's across the room, and his smile was for her alone. Later that evening, as they sat in their modest apartment, Sebastian had sold the penthouse, claiming it was too far from what actually mattered. Valentina curled up against her husband's chest while he read through patient files, a habit he'd developed since joining the clinic's board of directors. Any regrets? She asked softly, thinking about the billions he'd donated to charity. the corporate empire he'd stepped back from, the completely different life he'd chosen. Sebastian set down the files and pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Only one," he said. Valentina pulled back to look at him concerned. "I regret," he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief, "that it took me so long to get sick enough to meet you." Valentina laughed and kissed him, tasting happiness and forever on his lips. Some fairy tales begin with once upon a time. Theirs began with Code Blue. And they lived happily, healthily, and hilariously ever after.